Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by the U.S. Army Warrior Fitness Team, which provides awareness of Army opportunities while serving. Team members are active duty soldiers that compete in CrossFit, strongman, strongwoman competitions, both nationally and internationally. Make sure to check out the link in our description for more details. On today's show, I have Brian Friend and Chase Ingraham here to discuss, is this the best CrossFit season structure? Everybody's repping their OGs today. We knew Chase would be here. Brian, what did you have? A little patch?
Yep. So when my plan was to hold it up when you said Chase's name.
Well, I appreciate that. You guys look great.
Great on
I don't
cue.
know what
I
it
love
is
this
about
one.
you guys.
The tie-dye.
Limited edition.
So looking into the season structure, I mean, there's so many different directions that we could go with this. A lot to unravel. But Chase, I want to start with you, kind of comparing CrossFit to some other sports. We look at the NFL, Major League Baseball. Those seasons are 6 months. CrossFit, also about 6 months, but there are the off-season competitions that make the season longer. Of course, they offer extra earning opportunities, also keep these athletes active. But for the growth of the sport and the longevity of these athletes, should there be a true off season?
Well, it's not a forced off season. That's the other thing we had to remember is like, yes, is there earning potential there? Is that a carrot for a lot of these athletes if they want to become professional CrossFit athletes? Yes, they have to maximize their opportunity because the window for an elite CrossFitter is very small. At the same time, you don't have to do the off-season events. It's not part of the CrossFit season, so you can take it off. I mean, it's not fair to be like, look at Rich and Matt and Tia do, and they took an off season. They decided to do maybe a refresher event coming into the next competition season, but the lore of maybe another payday is out there for the athletes, but they don't have to compete year round. That's their choice.
They also don't have to compete in the CrossFit Games season. They could, and we haven't really seen any of the most elite CrossFitters choose to do this yet, but they could choose to say, well, everyone's doing the open, quarterfinals, semifinals, and the games during that 6 months. I'm just going to prepare, and then I'm going to hope that I have the opportunity to qualify for whatever events they are or get an invite based on whatever I've done in the past to Wadapalooza, Dubai, and Rogue and try to clean up over there. So there's a lot of options that are potentially available if you're good enough.
Why don't you think athletes take that opportunity to just get rid of the CrossFit season and just make as much as they can on these off-season competitions?
I think this is the Ray Kroc lesson that Greg learned a long time ago, which is that the name counts for a lot. And that's why Ray Kroc, by the way, is the guy who took over McDonald's, but he wanted the name McDonald's because he recognized the value of that. And there's a ton of value in the name of CrossFit. And winning the CrossFit Games, even if it wasn't the most financially lucrative prize, is the most prestigious in the eyes of the athletes because of the name.
Looking at the season structure, we've seen a couple of different variations over the past couple of years. We had the regional days, sanctional days, and even a year where we had 2 opens in one calendar year. Now, this has been our second year of the semifinal format. Brian, do you think that the format has progressively gotten better? And what kind of system or season structure could actually advance the sport?
I'll just sit back and
no. The progressively gotten better is is an interesting phrasing because that would mean that like every step forward is a positive change, and I think that most people who were around during what was fairly consistent open regional games era would say that over the next 4 or 5 years since then, there have been so many changes, and with each one there's probably come some positive elements and some negative elements, largely depending on your point of view. And so from an athlete's perspective, that answer could be completely different than from a competition organizer's perspective, who may have seen the opportunity to be a part of the official CrossFit Games sanctional calendar in 2018, 19, 20 as like the pinnacle of their experience as a competition director. Then that was removed, or at least became a lot more difficult, moving to the current model where there are 10 semifinals instead of 28 sanctionals or whatever it ended up being. So perspective matters a lot, but I think that most people are probably and most groups of people probably like the streamlined format of the current season better than the sporadic nature of the sanctional season.
Chase, what are your thoughts on that?
I think Brian nailed it, obviously, because the each format has its pros, cons. Some had more cons than pros. I think the sanctional season thrust on us so aggressively with really no way of understanding what it was. It's like we didn't even have a rule book until I think during the Open, when it was like, okay, you can qualify through a sanction event or through your national championship or the top 20 in the Open. But if you are at a sanction event and all these people already qualified and you get like 50th place and you get to go to the CrossFit Games, and that was just an absolute mess. I think the least of the ones that I think was a viable solution. And then going into this Open, quarters, semis, last chance qualifier games format, like Brian said, at least there's a streamlined path from start to finish on how to get to the CrossFit Games. I do think it's a step forward from that. But at the same time, I think there is still room for improvement when it comes to the season structure.
Okay, so looking at the current season structure, let's do a little bit of breaking it down from different stages. Do you both like how we have 3 weeks of the Open and then it advances top 10% to quarters?
I'm okay with it.
3 weeks of the Open?
Yeah.
Was that I like the 3 week
and
Open
then top 10 to move on.
For the age group?
No, she's asking
No,
like,
so
do you like the individual plus quarter or the Open plus quarterfinal structure right now?
Oh, got it. I like it better than the sanctional season that we had. I think I think
okay,
there's
so then what is the perfect structure?
well, that's the thing. There is no perfect structure. And even if you create one, if you say that what it is, I think that's a huge red flag to begin with. And the hubris of a statement like that, if you were even designing it to say this is the perfect structure, would worry me. If it's an improved structure, I think that's the only thing we can really ask of CrossFit itself when you look at the season structure. Can we improve this? Not can we perfect that, because there is no such thing. There's going to be pros and cons to everything. The way it's set up now between Open, quarters, finals, semifinals, last chance qualifier, the issues I have more with the season structure have to do more with programming than it does the actual season structure itself, as well as the allocation of athletes at each semifinal. I think there's improvement that can be done there. I thought the CrossFit Games was a great example of a case to be made why all semifinals should actually have the same programming, because a lot of athletes were tested in various different ways that did not translate from semifinals to the CrossFit Games. And if you're going to do things as as new, right? New but old, as that we saw at the CrossFit Games, I think it's a benefit to the season and the CrossFit Games itself if athletes are all tested in similar ways to qualify for a test like they had designed this year in Madison.
And to what Chase is saying, this was a intricacy of Dave Castro's programming over a period of years, where you would see a breadcrumb of an idea or part of a picture show up at one stage of the season, and then the evolution or the rest of the process or the thought around some concept of testing a new piece of equipment, a new structure of format, a new variation of whatever, would trickle either up the season, Open regionals towards the Games, or down from the Games and back recede into the Open over the next couple of years. And the element of doing that, I thought was overall really valuable for the community as a whole. One of the aspects of CrossFit, of course, is variability, and to continually have these different ways to interact with all the different modalities that we participate in and challenge ourselves with. So I thought that if, to Chase's point about the program of the Games is good, but there was so much new stuff this year that it was kind of a lot all at once to integrate across the entire, worldwide community. And we see some of that happening, but maybe if it's sprinkled in a little bit more sporadically, each one has a greater impact.
And I think to be fair to Boz too, in the season program structure, this guy had to program an entire season in 6 months on the fly. He was told he was going to program the CrossFit. He was told he's going to program quarterfinals, semifinals, last chance qualified, your age group, and the CrossFit Games in January. Dave Castro has been planning the CrossFit Games since 2007. And the season and the Open, and Boz didn't get the program the Open. So we're talking. I said this at the program on the programming side, but like to give Boz a little bit of credit and some room to grow is that this dude had to program an entire season in 6 months when, Dave Castro had been curating this format and this, he was bringing events in from, he talked about in 2010. And then you see the standard get unveiled in 2019. And like Brian said, is, what event from the games previous is going to trickle down to, say, the regionals, and what in regionals is going to trickle down to the Open, and what from the Open is going to trickle up. Is it going to add into the regionals, the semifinals of the CrossFit Games? Like Dave got to play with that for years. And Boz had to program the CrossFit Games season in January as it was unfolding. So I think they give him a little bit of credit or I don't know, a break as far as how the season went last year is needed.
Lauren, let me get back to something Chase was saying earlier. So I also have noticed something about this season. After the games ended, I kind of just went back and took a big breath and looked at what had happened this entire year. And I noticed something that I thought when I saw it, I was like, I have to investigate this further. And there will be an article on Morning Chalk Up that explains this in a little bit more detail. But basically, the question I ended up asking was, do we need both quarterfinals and semifinals? And the reason I asked that is because when I looked back at the worldwide quarterfinals, not just the worldwide quarterfinals, both the worldwide quarterfinals and the individual by continent quarterfinals leaderboards, I noticed that almost all the names at the top of the list seemed to be people that eventually made the CrossFit Games. And so I wanted to find out if that was true or not. And the results speak for themselves, I think. So first of all, the worldwide quarterfinals competition is the only test, well, apart from the Open, that all of the athletes took the same test that were trying to get to the games. And so it's, even though there's some imperfections in that for sure, and you have a great example in a guy like Travis Mayer, who won it last year and took, I think, 114th worldwide this year, because he realized it wasn't that important part of the season. Despite that, 70% of the eventual games athletes would have qualified if you just took the top 40 worldwide after quarterfinals alone.
Wow.
That's 27 out of 40 of the men and 29 out of 40 of the women that were in the worldwide quarterfinals top 40 also qualified through their individual semifinal path or last chance qualifier. And by the way, all 4 of the last chance qualifier winners would have qualified through quarterfinals as well.
So are you saying to get rid of semifinals or to just get rid of quarterfinals? Because I think the point of quarterfinals was to be more inclusive to the community, give people like myself like a little carrot to chase.
Sure. No, there's definitely some other nuances about quarterfinals that are relevant in this regard. I was curious if the quarterfinal test, and to what Chase was talking with the programming, it does speak to the level of the programming that it was finding the fittest anyway, basically. And something that I thought was particularly notable was that 18 of the top 20 men and 19 of the top 20 women at the games would have qualified anyway. So almost all of the variability, in fact, in the women's side, I think it was 23 of the top 25 was in the bottom of the field. And if you look year to year at the CrossFit Games, there's a huge amount of turnover in the bottom 15, and no matter what the format is, because obviously there's a lot of competition at the cut line. So it was kind of like a 2-pronged thought that I ended up having by the end of this, which is, whatever the choice is, does eliminating one stage of the season make it easier on the athletes, and therefore would yield a better product on the field of play, which is what I always want. That's why I don't like the long drawn out semifinals, because I want it just to be like a week or two. We find everyone, and everyone has 8 or 9 weeks to prepare, and so I'm going to see the best version of each person, not someone who's finding out 2 weeks before, 4 weeks before, 6 weeks before, and 9 weeks before, all trying to compete for the title of fittest on earth. It doesn't make any sense. Secondarily, I think Justin Berg has talked about this, and Adrian Bosman has talked about this on some of the press conferences that they've done this year, that there was a lot of, like Chase said, planning going on in the middle of the season. And there's this huge task of programming every stage of competition. And while someone at home could sit there and make a remark about this nuance of quarterfinals that wasn't done well, they had to push forward and think about the next stages of competition for the age groups, the adaptives, the elites, the teams. And in the meantime, that's a big burden. Well, if you strip the season down by one stage, it alleviates some of that burden as well on CrossFit's end.
But if we're looking to like grow the sport and professionalize it more and, get more people included from all over the world to make it really this worldwide competition, like, is this the right structure?
Yes, because if you start at the tail end of that, you're looking at open and quarters. So when I look at open and quarters, I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Mhm.
Quarters isn't necessarily a difficult thing for a above average towards elite athlete to qualify for, yet it's a great thing for other athletes to chase. And you want both of those things. Having the open not be as like high barrier of entry like it maybe have done in years past because it qualifies directly to regionals. So yes, in the beginning, but I think to simplify the season a little bit more, I think you want to look more towards the end of the season. I'm looking at the last chance qualifier. I think there's a better way to vet from quarters to semis and semis to CrossFit Games that you don't need a last chance qualifier anymore. Because I feel like the only reason you have a last chance qualifier is to offset to circle back again to programming. We're going to catch all these people who just didn't get a fair shake or this region and that. And it's like, if you all were doing the same thing, you don't need that catch all anymore. If the guy programming the CrossFit Games is programming the semifinals because he knows what test is coming and he knows how to test these athletes for that, you don't need a last chance qualifier. You just didn't show up like you should have on game day. That's called sports.
And I think that the one element of the last chance qualifier that people might like is that it allows for a continent or a region in the world that's improved or gotten deeper at the top end to get an extra spot. But I still think that there's a way to do that, and I've written and spoken about this, and I think Chase might even be alluding to it within a semifinal programming. It's just an idea, but one of the things I talked about was have 5 semifinals one week and 5 the next week, and allow 2 quote unquote last chance spots from each of those weeks to go to, everyone can have, each semifinal can have an allocation, and then you have 2 extra ones, and they go to the best 2 people from anywhere in the world that competed on that weekend, and the best 2 from the next weekend, or something like that.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is when we look at the season structure, the biggest, I don't want to say like complaint or I guess like suggestion to make it better is really it comes down to the programming. Is that correct for both of you?
Programming with, like I said, programming and allocation of spots.
Okay, sure.
And I would say timing. That was one thing that I thought was pretty tough this year. There's a lot of time that passed between quarterfinals finishing and the announcement of the semifinal rosters happening. 39 days. That's how long it took. That shouldn't happen. The athletes should have more time to prepare, to know where they're going. Their fans can know where they're going, their families, et cetera, that want to travel there, and for the competitions that are hosting them to plan. And then the semifinals, I don't think they need to stretch out as long as they are. I think we can condense that a little bit and therefore give a less variable amount of time for the athletes that do make it to prepare for the games, which again produces the best product on the field of play, which that's what I want. Whatever 40 athletes end up being there, I want them to be coming at their best.
Well, and Brian, you and I have talked about before that CrossFit isn't necessarily trying to find the fittest 40. They're trying to find the fittest on earth. But with some of these changes that both of you have mentioned, do you think that there is a way that we can have both the fittest 40 men and women and crown the 2 fittest on earth?
I would say yes to that in any context of conversation. I think that is very likely going to happen, and you're gonna ultimately find the fittest either way. What I really am chasing here is the last heat or the last 2 heats at the CrossFit Games, and how high of a level of competitor do you want that to be? And if you want it to be people that have a dramatic influence on the heats 3 and 4, then we should find a method that allows for different regions that happen to be strong year to year over a period of years to have more representation there, not because of where they're from, but because they're the fittest.
I think when I like what Brian was talking about earlier is condensing maybe a semifinal week or weekends. That'll help give more time for athletes to be prepared for the CrossFit Games. But that big disparaging gap between quarterfinals and semifinals, again, I think that easily gets eliminated when you have a direct, regionally allocated system for qualifying to semifinals. I understand the thought process and the good intention of this continental move people around and make it balance kind of a thing. But that's one of the things that regionals did right, even though it didn't always get it 100% correct, right? Some regionals were more stacked than others just because where people live. But at the same time, people also had the freedom to move. You can move to the regional that you wanted to compete in. You saw like the difference between the Central East and the South Central. There's lots of people that moved around to get out of these areas. And I think when you have something like regionally allocated semifinals, then when quarterfinals are over, the next week, you know where everybody's going. And if it's 39 days, now you have over a month to plan and prep for where you're going to go. Not just as an athlete. As an athlete, they're going to do what they're going to do. It doesn't matter that much for them. But as a fan of the sport, a fan of one of your athletes, even as an affiliate of one of your teams or your athletes, is that when you know where they're going to go the entire season, you can actually get ready to plan for something like that. So when you talk about semifinal attendance, I think that is a direct result of the community having no idea where the athletes are going to go until weeks before the competition.
Right, and that actually tracks perfectly with the attendance pattern across the entire world, because the ones that were well attended are the ones that only had one. So you knew where to go.
Chase, what's your bottom line?
It's really easy to sit back and say things need to change. And it's really easy to sit here and say these are the things that you need to fix. What's really hard to do is to sit back in a room with an entire system and people that you have to work with to get this done on a global scale. But at the same time, I think it would be really helpful and also encouraging, I think, for the community at large, is if there are steps taken towards simplifying the season, not just for the athletes, but for the fans and the community. Because if you want to talk global engagement, when you make it easier for your average athlete, for your fan, for your affiliate, or just for the casual viewer at home, you do make that a more inclusive system. You do make that a more inclusive season. And then at the same time, you have a bigger fan base that follows the season from start to finish.
Brian, what's your bottom line?
I think my bottom line is I do think that the CrossFit Games team is working on having these kinds of conversations, and I think that they have been intentional about asking for feedback from different groups of people, and I think that we will see a change of some kind to the way that the season's laid out next year based on the things that they've learned from this year. You know, at the end of the day, even though a lot of these guys have been around for a long time, this was the first year in their new positions, their new dynamic of their team. And of course, they're going to learn some things. I think that it's okay to be, you know, critical when the intent is to improve. And I think that that's what they're doing of themselves. And I feel optimistic about what's going on right now in the direction that the season is moving.
Brian, Chase, thank you guys for sitting down to talk about the different ways that we can possibly change the season structure. 2023. We'll see what happens.
See what happens.